What would you do if strangers on the street accused you of kidnapping your own child? This is the true story of a black father who was publicly humiliated just because his son is white. They filmed him. They called the police. They tried to destroy his life. Stay with us to the end to see how he fought back with love, truth, and courage. If you believe in justice, family, and real stories that matter, hit that subscribe button and join us. The summer sun poured its golden light over the quiet city park. Birds chirped softly in the trees, and the gentle hum of distant traffic was a faint reminder of the bustling world beyond the green canopy. Marcus adjusted the strap of the baby carrier holding his son, Oliver, close to his chest. The little boy was barely 2 years old, his soft blonde hair catching the sunlight like spun gold. His big blue eyes watched the world around him with innocent wonder, completely unaware of the silent storm that sometimes swirled around his father. Marcus was a tall man, athletic and handsome in a way that made him stand out. His skin was a rich, deep brown, contrasting sharply with the pale complexion of his son. Every day, he carried a quiet burden that few understood. Oliver was his son, his flesh and blood. But to the eyes of many strangers, their bond was invisible, replaced by suspicion. Today was supposed to be simple: a walk through the park, fresh air for the boy, and some peace for Marcus's tired soul. After all, life had not been kind. Oliver's mother had died during childbirth, leaving Marcus alone to navigate the difficult road of single fatherhood. The nights were long, filled with worry and exhaustion. Days blurred into each other, dominated by the constant struggle to provide, protect, and love without fail. He stopped near a small fountain, letting Oliver's little fingers splash in the cool water. The boy giggled, a sound so pure it made Marcus's heart ache with both joy and sorrow. As he smiled, 2 women passed by on the path ahead. One of them glanced over and did a double take. Marcus caught the quick, subtle narrowing of her eyes as she whispered something to her friend. The words were muffled, but the meaning was clear. He felt the sting of judgment wash over him, cold and unrelenting. It wasn't the first time this happened. Nearly every outing brought its share of sideways looks, whispered doubts, and outright hostility. People saw a tall black man carrying a white child, and their minds raced to the worst conclusions. Despite the paperwork proving his paternity, despite the hospital records, despite his word, none of it mattered. Where did you get him? The voice sliced through the soft murmur of the park. It was a young woman's, sharp and accusatory. Marcus looked up to see a teenager staring at him with suspicion etched on her face. Oliver looked up too, sensing the tension. Marcus tightened his hold and forced a calm smile. "He's my son," Marcus said evenly. "His mother died when he was born. I'm raising him on my own." The girl blinked, as if processing something that didn't fit her worldview. She shrugged and hurried away, but the damage lingered in the air like a bad smell. Marcus exhaled slowly and continued walking. He didn't know how many times he'd have to endure this. How many times he'd have to explain that his love was real, that Oliver was his son, that their bond was unbreakable. This was his life: constant battle against ignorance, against prejudice, against the cruel assumptions of a world that couldn't see past color. But for now, he focused on the light in Oliver's eyes, on the soft laugh that bubbled up when the boy kicked his feet in the air. This was why he fought. This was why he kept going. Because love wasn't about appearances. It was about the heart. Marcus woke early the next morning, the soft cooing sounds from Oliver's crib filling the small apartment. The boy's blonde curls framed his peaceful face, his tiny chest rising and falling with each steady breath. Marcus smiled softly, his heart swelling with a fierce protective love. But the warmth was shadowed by the weight of the day ahead. Life for Marcus was a relentless balancing act. He worked long hours at a local gym, personal training clients to make ends meet. Between shifts, he prepared bottles, changed diapers, and read picture books in a voice that made Oliver giggle. Being a single dad was harder than he ever imagined, especially with the added burden of constant judgment from the world outside. Today, like most days, he planned to take Oliver to the nearby playground. It was their little routine, a few hours under the sun where his son could run and laugh, and Marcus could feel, if only for a moment, the simple joy of fatherhood without the world's cruel gaze. Marcus dressed quickly, slipping on a fitted black shirt that showed the strength in his arms and broad shoulders. He packed a small bag with snacks, wipes, and a change of clothes for Oliver. The boy was already awake, eyes wide and curious, tugging at Marcus's shirt. "Ready for the park, buddy?" Marcus smiled, lifting Oliver into his arms. Oliver's grin was infectious, his tiny hands patting Marcus's face as if to say, "Let's go." Outside, the air was crisp, the city humming gently with life. As Marcus carried Oliver through the streets, a few heads turned. Some looked with admiration, others with suspicion. A woman sitting on a bench whispered something to her companion. Marcus caught the words, "He's not the father. That's not his child." He swallowed the rising frustration, focusing on the bright, eyes locked on his own. At the playground, children shouted with joy, parents chatting and watching. Marcus led Oliver down to toddle toward the swings, his little legs wobbling but determined. Nearby, a teenage girl was scrolling on her phone, occasionally glancing at Marcus and Oliver. Without warning, she stood and took a few steps closer, phone camera pointed discreetly. Marcus felt the prickle of discomfort but said nothing. He was used to being watched, scrutinized as if he were a criminal. "Why is she filming us?" Marcus whispered to himself, tightening his grip on the stroller parked nearby. The whispers began. "That's so weird," a mother murmured to her friend. "Why is that man here alone with a white baby? Where's the mother?" Another parent nodded, eyes darting toward Marcus. A group of kids nearby giggled and pointed, one saying, "He looks like he stole him." Marcus's jaw clenched. The hurt behind those words cut deeper than he wanted to admit. He wanted to shout, to explain, to make everyone understand the truth, but he knew they wouldn't listen. The story they'd made up was easier to believe than the real one. Oliver toddled back, a bright smile lighting up his face as he reached for Marcus's hand. "Let's go," Marcus said gently, lifting his son back into his arms. As they walked away, Marcus caught the teenage girl again, her phone aimed directly at them, recording every step. His heart pounded, not from fear for himself, but for Oliver. He vowed silently that no matter what, he would protect his son from a world that refused to see their love as real. Marcus entered the small, cozy cafe, a familiar place where he often stopped to catch a break between work and errands. He balanced Oliver carefully in his arms, careful not to wake the little boy who had finally succumbed to sleep. The aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods was comforting, a rare moment of peace. As he approached the counter, the barista, a young white woman with sharp eyes, glanced at Oliver and then back at Marcus. There was a flicker of hesitation in her gaze, almost imperceptible, but Marcus noticed. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but distant. Marcus smiled warmly. "Just a coffee, please, and a bottle for Oliver." The barista nodded but didn't meet his eyes. As she rang up the order, she leaned slightly toward a colleague and whispered, loud enough for Marcus to hear, "Is he his dad?" Marcus's heart tightened. He looked down at Oliver's sleeping face and shook his head slowly. "Yes, I am." Behind the counter, a few other customers glanced over, their expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled judgment. Marcus forced himself to stay calm. He was used to these moments, the silent questions, the doubt that hovered in the air like a storm cloud. A woman sitting nearby lowered her newspaper and stared. She whispered to her friend, "I don't think that's his kid." Marcus swallowed the rising anger and pain. He remembered a day months ago, right after Oliver was born, when he was at the hospital. Nurses had looked at him strangely, questioning if he was the father. One nurse had even asked for DNA proof in a way that felt humiliating. That memory cut deeper than he wanted to admit. "Hey," Marcus said quietly to Oliver, brushing a stray curl from the boy's forehead. "We're more than what they think." Oliver's eyelids fluttered, and he gave a small coo. Marcus sat down at a corner table, sipping his coffee, trying to let the moment pass. But the atmosphere felt heavy, oppressive, like a silent accusation. Just then, a child near the window pointed and said loudly, "Why is that man with a white baby? Is he a bad guy?" The mother shushed the child quickly, but the words hung in the air. Marcus's eyes met the mother's, and for a moment, their gazes locked. In her eyes, he saw fear, fear born from ignorance. He wanted to tell her, "I'm just a dad trying to raise my son." But the words caught in his throat. He felt the weight of society's suspicion pressing down on him, a reminder that no matter how much love he poured into Oliver, the world was ready to doubt him. It was a warm Saturday afternoon when Marcus decided to take Oliver to the park again. The sun filtered through the canopy of trees, casting dappled shadows over the winding paths and playground. Parents chatted on benches while children ran and played, their laughter ringing through the air. Marcus held Oliver securely in his arms as they strolled along the path. The boy's curious eyes scanned everything around him, occasionally catching sight of other children and waving a tiny hand. As they passed a bench where two young white women sat, Marcus felt a sudden shift in the atmosphere. The women exchanged quick glances, their expressions tightening. One of them, blonde and tall, stood up abruptly, pointing a finger at Marcus. "Hey, where did you get that kid?" she called out sharply, voice raised enough to draw the attention of nearby parkgoers. Marcus froze, startled by the sudden confrontation. People began to look over, whispering and turning their heads. Oliver stirred in his father's arms, sensing the tension. The second woman pulled out her phone and began recording. "Who are you? Are you kidnapping him?" the blonde demanded, stepping closer. Marcus's jaw tightened. He took a steadying breath and looked at them calmly, trying to defuse the situation. "Sir, I'm raising this boy," Marcus said firmly. "He's my son." The blonde laughed bitterly. "Yeah, right. You expect us to believe that? That's ridiculous." A small crowd began to gather, the energy shifting from curiosity to suspicion. Some people pulled out their phones to record as well. Marcus's voice remained steady but tinged with frustration. "You don't know anything about us. Please don't accuse me falsely." "False?" the second woman scoffed. "We're calling the police. This is serious." Before Marcus could say another word, the blonde hit the call button on her phone. The waiting minutes stretched agonizingly. People whispered and stared, many taking sides without any real information. Oliver, sensing his father's stress, clung tighter to Marcus's neck. Marcus's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the sting of injustice. Here he was, a devoted father, accused in public, humiliated for the color of his skin and the color of his son's hair. The park that had once been a place of joy now felt like a courtroom of suspicion. The distant wail of sirens approached swiftly, cutting through the heavy tension that had settled over the park. Marcus tightened his grip on Oliver, who was now crying softly, frightened by the sudden commotion. The small crowd parted as two police officers arrived, their uniforms crisp and authoritative. "Sir, step aside," one of the officers commanded firmly but without overt hostility. Marcus complied, holding Oliver close as the officers approached cautiously. "We received a report of a possible child abduction," the taller officer explained, eyes scanning the crowd before settling on Marcus. Marcus felt a sharp pang of humiliation. The looks from onlookers burned into him, as if branding him guilty before any word was spoken. "I am Oliver's father," Marcus said calmly, but with underlying strain. "His mother passed away at his birth. I'm raising him alone." The officers exchanged a quick glance. "Can you provide identification and proof of guardianship?" the shorter officer asked. Marcus nodded, reaching into his pocket to retrieve his wallet and a small folder containing Oliver's birth certificate and his own ID. He handed the documents over, his hands steady despite the storm raging inside. As the officers examined the papers, the crowd's murmurs grew louder. Some offered murmurs of sympathy, but many were skeptical, their faces etched with doubt. Oliver whimpered, sensing the tension. Marcus kissed his forehead gently. "Everything will be okay, buddy," he whispered. The taller officer handed back the documents. "Everything seems to be in order, sir. Sorry for the inconvenience." Marcus exhaled, relief mingled with lingering anger. He looked at the two young women, who stood off to the side, their faces flushed with a mix of satisfaction and defiance. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly, then lifted Oliver higher, shielding him from the prying eyes. As the officers walked away, Marcus felt eyes still burning into his back. He knew this wasn't the end, just another painful chapter in a story he had been forced to live every day. The sun had set hours ago, but Marcus lay awake in the dim light of his small apartment. Oliver was finally asleep in his crib, the soft rise and fall of the baby monitor his only comfort. Yet the silence was deafening. Marcus's phone vibrated relentlessly on the nightstand, notifications piling up one after another. Curious and anxious, Marcus grabbed the phone and unlocked it. The screen was flooded with alerts, messages, shares, comments, and news articles. His stomach tightened. Someone had posted the video from the park, the confrontation with the two women and the police arriving. But it wasn't the full story. The clip was edited, cropped, and captioned with insinuations that Marcus was a kidnapper, a danger, someone to fear. Comments streamed in like a tidal wave. Why is this man holding a white baby? Suspicious. This is why we need to watch out for people like him. Call the cops every time you see this happening. Fake dad, real threat. Marcus's hands trembled as he scrolled. Some messages were even more vicious, attacking his race and character, painting him as a criminal without evidence. The video had gone viral overnight. Worse still, Marcus received a call from his supervisor at the gym. "Marcus, we saw the video," the voice said awkwardly. "Given the situation and the attention it's drawing, I think it's best if we put your position on hold for now." The blow landed hard. "No," Marcus whispered, clutching the phone. "I'm his father. I'm not going anywhere." Tears welled up in his eyes as he glanced over at Oliver, peacefully sleeping, unaware of the storm his existence had ignited. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about how society viewed a black man loving a white child, a love so simple and pure, yet so easily twisted into suspicion and hate. Marcus wiped his tears and sat up straighter. He knew he couldn't let this break him. For Oliver's sake, he had to fight back. The next morning, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, his mind racing. He'd spent the night scrolling through countless messages, some hateful, others filled with ignorance and fear. The weight of the viral video, and the fallout, pressed on his chest like a stone. He looked down at Oliver, playing quietly on the floor with a small toy car, his blonde curls bouncing as he giggled. This was why Marcus had to stand strong. Determined, Marcus opened his laptop and searched for organizations that helped families facing discrimination. He found a local civil rights group that offered legal aid and advocacy for victims of racial profiling. His hands hesitated for a moment. Then he dialed the number. "Hello, this is Marcus Bennett," he said, voice steady but weary. "I need help. My son and I are being targeted because of our race, and it's tearing us apart." The woman on the other end listened patiently. "We're here for you, Marcus. Let's set up a meeting. You're not alone." Days later, Marcus sat across from Denise, a passionate and kind lawyer who specialized in civil rights. She listened carefully as he recounted the events, the public accusations, the viral video, the job loss, and the emotional toll. "This isn't just about your son and you," Denise said firmly. "It's about systemic racism, about breaking stereotypes that put families like yours at risk every day." Together, they crafted a plan. Marcus would give an interview to a local news outlet, sharing the real story behind the viral video. He wanted to show the world the truth, a black father's love for his son, untainted by prejudice. The interview was nerve-wracking. Cameras, bright lights, and questions that often felt invasive. But Marcus spoke honestly, from his heart. "This is my son, Oliver. His mother died when he was born. I have raised him every day since. The love I have for him is the same any father feels. But what hurts is that so many see us and only see color. They don't see family." As the interview aired, Marcus held Oliver close at home, praying that their story might spark understanding, even just a little. The evening news broadcast felt like an eternity as Marcus sat on the worn couch in his modest apartment, Oliver nestled safely in his lap. The soft glow of the television illuminated their faces, the world outside fading into the background. Marcus had rehearsed what he wanted to say countless times in his head, but hearing his own voice echo through the living room still sent a shiver down his spine. "This is my son, Oliver," Marcus said during the interview, his gaze steady and firm. "His mother passed away during childbirth. I have raised him every single day since. The love I have for him is no different from any father's love. But what hurts the most is that many people see us and only see the color of our skin and hair. They don't see the bond, the family." Oliver, too young to understand the media frenzy surrounding them, played quietly with his favorite stuffed lion beside them. The interview ended with a message of hope, that love transcends color, that family comes in many forms, and that society needs to confront its biases. As the broadcast ended, Marcus exhaled slowly and looked down at his son, who gazed back at him with innocent blue eyes. The next morning, Marcus's phone buzzed incessantly. Messages flooded in. Some were kind, others cautious, many confused, and a painful few filled with venom. But amid the storm, one message caught his attention. It was from Claire, a name Marcus hadn't heard in years, but one deeply connected to Oliver's past. "Marcus, it's Claire. I saw the interview. I just want you to know that I and Oliver's mother always believed in you. She was proud of how you stepped up, and so are we." Marcus stared at the message, emotions welling up unexpectedly. His fingers trembled as he typed a reply. "Thank you, Claire. That means more than you know." Claire called later that afternoon. Her voice was soft, but resolute. "Marcus, I've known you since before Oliver was born. When you and Sarah were together, we were all so happy to see you two start a family. When Sarah passed, I know it was hard, but you never gave up. I'm so glad Oliver has you." Tears pricked Marcus's eyes. "Thank you, Claire. Sometimes it feels like no one sees the truth." Claire sighed. "That's the world we live in. Quick to judge, slow to understand. But people who know you know the truth. You're an amazing dad." The conversation gave Marcus renewed strength. It reminded him that his fight was not just for himself and Oliver, but for all families like theirs who faced prejudice every day. However, the battle was far from over. On social media platforms, the comment sections remained battlegrounds of conflicting voices. Supporters rallied around Marcus, sharing stories of their own struggles and championing love over hate. But the hate messages persisted, relentless in their cruelty and ignorance. One post read, "No matter what you say, that kid doesn't belong with him." Another, "This is just a stunt for sympathy." Marcus's heart ached at such coldness. Yet, he refused to let it break him. One evening, as Oliver played on the floor with colorful blocks, he suddenly looked up, his small voice breaking the quiet. "Dada safe?" Marcus paused, the simple question cutting through the noise swirling in his mind. His son was asking, in his own way, if the world was a safe place for them. Marcus swallowed the lump in his throat and smiled gently, scooping Oliver into his arms. "Always, baby," he whispered. "I will keep you safe, no matter what." The boy giggled, pressing his cheek against Marcus's. In that moment, Marcus realized that while the outside world might not always see them as a family, his love was enough to create a sanctuary. He vowed to protect Oliver with everything he had, not just from the cruelty of strangers, but from the doubts and fears that sometimes crept into their own hearts. Marcus knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but as he held his son close, he felt a fierce determination burn within him. Their story was not just about hardship and discrimination. It was about hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his child. And that truth, Marcus believed, was powerful enough to change hearts, one person at a time. The following week passed like a storm rolling slowly across the city, loud, messy, and impossible to ignore. Marcus's interview had gone national. Bigger media outlets picked it up. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like #ThisIsLove and #FathersComeInAllColors, alongside darker corners where racism continued to fester. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. Even his small apartment building felt different. Neighbors who had once barely nodded now greeted him with cautious warmth. Mrs. Carson, the elderly woman on the third floor, handed him a note with cookies. "We see you, and we're sorry for how the world treats you. You're doing great." But with attention came confrontation. At the grocery store, a man muttered, "TikTok, Dad," under his breath as Marcus walked by with Oliver in the cart. Another shopper came up asking for a selfie with the guy from the park video, as if Marcus were some kind of exhibit. He hated the feeling, being known for surviving a racist incident instead of simply being seen as a father. Meanwhile, Denise, the civil rights attorney, encouraged Marcus to pursue action against the women who called the police. "You have grounds," she explained. "What they did was discriminatory and dangerous. You and your son could have been seriously harmed." Marcus hesitated. "I don't want revenge. I just want peace. I want this to stop happening to people like me." Denise nodded. "Understood. But justice doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it's just making sure it doesn't happen again." The women who had accused Marcus at the park were now facing their own backlash. Their names had been revealed, some by accident, others by angry internet users. They lost jobs. They deleted social media accounts. One issued a public apology on a small podcast. "We didn't mean harm. We were just scared. We thought we were doing the right thing." But Marcus wasn't comforted. Fear wasn't an excuse. They hadn't been scared of a threat. They were scared of him. His skin. His body. His presence. And that fear almost cost him everything. One evening, a police officer knocked at Marcus's door, not to arrest him or ask questions. This one came alone, without a partner or a notepad. "Mr. Bennett?" the officer asked gently. Marcus tensed. "Yeah, I was one of the responding officers that day in the park. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I watched the footage later. I see now that I didn't handle it right. We treated you like a suspect, not a parent. I know sorry doesn't fix it, but I wanted to tell you face to face." Marcus didn't speak for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Thank you for coming." The officer left. No cameras, no press. Just a quiet moment of accountability. Later that night, Marcus sat by the window with Oliver asleep in his arms. The baby's weight felt heavier than usual. Maybe because Marcus finally allowed himself to feel everything. The grief, the rage, the fear, the pride. He whispered aloud, "I don't want to be someone's wake-up call. I don't want to be a lesson or a headline. I just want to raise my boy." Outside, someone passed by with their dog, glanced up at the window, and kept walking. Maybe this time, they didn't see a threat. Maybe they just saw a father and his son. The sun was out again, bright and clean like it hadn't dared to be in weeks. The park looked almost identical to the day everything had fallen apart. Green trees swaying gently, children laughing, families stretched out on picnic blankets. But for Marcus, everything had changed. He walked slowly, deliberately, his head high. Oliver sat in the stroller, babbling to his toy lion, kicking his small legs with joy. The stroller wobbled slightly on the gravel path, but Marcus's grip was steady. People noticed him again. They always did. But this time, the looks were different. A nod here, a smile there, a quiet murmur of, "I saw your story," from a passing jogger. One woman even stopped to say, "Your son's lucky to have you." Marcus still didn't know how to respond to that. He didn't feel like a hero. He just felt tired. They reached the same fountain where everything had started. Oliver's giggle echoed across the stone and water as Marcus lifted him gently from the stroller and sat him on the ledge. The boy reached down, splashing tiny hands into the water just like before. Marcus watched him for a long time, hands resting on his knees. He could feel the weight of the past few weeks, of years, really, pressing into his spine. But there was something different inside him now, a kind of clarity. He hadn't changed the world. Racism hadn't disappeared. But he had spoken. He had stood his ground. And people had listened. He reached into the stroller bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of Oliver's birth certificate. Marcus didn't carry it around anymore, not because he didn't need to, but because he refused to let fear be a permanent passenger in their lives. He stared at it for a moment, then slowly tore it in half and let the pieces fall into the park trash can nearby. Oliver looked up at him and blinked. "Dada." Marcus smiled and lifted his son high into the air, twirling him once, twice, until the boy shrieked with delight. "Yes, baby. Dada's here." They stood together, father and son, black and white, visible and unseen, doubted and undeniable. A few people turned to look. A couple even reached for their phones. Marcus didn't care. He held Oliver close and whispered, "You're mine. Always mine. And no one can take that away." As they walked back toward the stroller, Marcus didn't lower his eyes like he used to. He didn't rush or shrink. He walked like a man who belonged, not just in the park, but in the world. Because he did. And so did his son.